So, all right, the meeting is being recorded. So a little bit about Bay Rising to set the context. Bay Rising, the organization I work for, is an alliance, a regional alliance of over 30 community groups that represent working class communities and communities of color in the Bay Area. And our collaboration is around building political power for those communities. So engaging them to vote, letting people know what's on the ballot, letting people know about how they can get involved in the political system. And my role in this is building capacity with our groups in communications and digital organizing. So so to start off, I guess I'll say, we've done some experimentation, and I think, I'm flattered that Jessica has called me an expert. I think there's like really a whole range of what expertise can mean. I've definitely experimented some with digital organizing strategy, and there's so much more that we can do. But in one of the first questions that to tackle in terms of how can we use social media and other technology to find people who aren't yet active in disability rights or justice movements. Bay Rising has experimented with this a little bit. For example, we ran a census campaign. So getting people who are in so-called hard to count communities to fill out the census. And we ran digital ads on Facebook and Instagram. And there are other possibilities too that we didn't go into, but I think digital ads are a really important way to bring people into our movements. Catching people as they're scrolling, you can target people by their interests, and if they're interested in something that's adjacent to what you're working on. For example, people might be looking for resources, or might be living in a certain place, might like certain pages. You can target them, to make sure that they're seeing your ads and have the opportunity to get involved that way, and might be signing a petition or saying like, yes, I will sign on, I will fill out the census. So we did some of that. I think and there are other exciting ways that you can make that even more specific, like even down to who's at a certain building. So if there's like a community center, for example, that you want to make sure that people at the community center see your ads, you could geo-target to that building. But I think that the other piece, besides just kind of getting people on our lists and getting them on, onto the track of getting involved in our organizations, is how are we actually creating community with this? And as part of that, how are we creating anti-racist spaces? How are we building community across differences? And so it doesn't just end with ads and list building. It's really, what are you doing this for? And group situations online, like Facebook groups, for example, I think can be really helpful in building community, letting people like share about themselves and build relationships with each other. You can also bring people into groups like that, or a series of Zoom conversations or something like that. through ads, so they don't have to be separate strategies necessarily. Yeah. So I think being, as Jessica was saying, we're already in a digital age. We've been in a digital age for decades. So, many of us are already using these tools. I think being able to take it to the next level is about being intentional in how we use those tools and, marrying the digital tools with other organizing tools that we may be familiar with, like, well, the ladder of engagement. Is your ladder of engagement, does it include like digital steps? What's the digital engagement if someone's first step is to look at your Facebook page? Where do they go to from there? So planning it out is really helpful in getting started. And yeah, so ladder of engagement, the idea is to bring people in step by step more to your organization. So it could be, first they start off with something that's easier for them, like they share a post, and then you could ask them, maybe you engage with them in the comments. If they've commented on your Facebook post, you say, hey, thanks so much for your comment. This is what I think about this. Would you be interested in staying in touch with us and signing up for our email list? And once they're on your email list, you can ask them, hey, can you make a phone call to this decision maker, or can you send a tweet? And gradually getting them involved in your organization and bringing them into the community. So yeah. Let's see what else.
You can keep going, Irene, if you want to, but if you're pausing, that was a really wonderful start. If you want to pause there, and we can do some conversation in a minute.
Yeah, I'll pause there.
Thank you so much for that. One thing I want to go back to in a minute is the community question, right? Because that seems so hard when we're not face to face. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and from others on that. So now we're going to go to Andrew.
Hi. I'm so glad to be here. Yeah, I was just listening to Irene. Maybe the first thing to say about Crypt the Vote is that we are more focused on a particular platform of digital activity, which is Twitter, although we do have a Facebook page and we have a blog but we use those more as a utility to support the Twitter discussion. Whereas, so it's really I'm really only talking about a certain flavor of digital activity. But to go back and describe what we are, for those who may not know, well, basically we started, myself, Alice Wong, who lives in the Bay Area, and Greg Beratan, who like me lives in the New York State, had gotten to know each other online back in, say, 2015, 2016, and specifically through mainly Twitter, and kind of found each other to be kindred spirits and had the same desires. And one thing we shared was a concern that with an upcoming election, this was before, just at the start of the 2016 election, we were concerned that yet again, we would have another full election cycle with very little recognition of disability issues. And it's hard to say who really decided. I think kind of it was Alice that really crystallized the idea was, well, why don't we start our own discussion of disability issues on Twitter and use a hashtag that is essentially hashtag serves as both a slogan that has meaning to the people who hear it, conveys a message, but it also is technically a tool that ties conversations together. And again, that may be obvious for people who are Twitter users and know sort of instinctively what hashtags do and how they work. But, you know, at the time, having been new to Twitter myself, I didn't even fully understand what hashtags were or why they were used or important. So we came up with the hashtag #CryptTheVote. And so what we decided to do was to use that to tie all our conversations together. And we started out with a pretty modest goal, which was to have conversations before each presidential debate. So like literally an hour before, we would schedule out and announce and say, hey, anybody who's interested using this hashtag, we're going to have discussions about what we hope to see in the upcoming presidential debate, and what we hoped and thought would be possible to discuss on disability issues. And that kind of morphed into also live tweeting during the debates so that we and others could respond, you know, in real time to what was being said in the debates. And that inevitably spilled over without really any planning on our part to people having discussions after the debate, in between debates, and just whenever they felt like it, at any time of the day, any day of the week. Again, using the hashtag #CryptTheVote, they would attach it to whatever they wanted, whatever tweets they wanted to be part of that conversation. We would just tag it with #CryptTheVote. That's how it works. And so people were sharing their opinions. A lot of people sharing articles, because if you don't know, one of the things you can do in Twitter is paste the address of an article that you would like people to read. You know, a tweet has to be, I guess it's 240 or 280 characters. So it's very short. You can't share an article, but you can share a link to an article. And so there were conversations, there was link sharing, scheduled chats before debates, live tweet during debates. And then we pretty soon started to add our own scheduled topical discussions. We would pick a topic, related disability issues, and we would go looking for a guest host or two, somebody who was more of an expert on that area or a voice that we felt would be good for people to hear. We came up with questions beforehand. This is very key. Twitter chats are scheduled informally. In other words, you don't literally schedule like a Zoom call. You just tell people that from, 7 to 8 p.m. on a Sunday, you're going to have this discussion on this topic. And we could just let it be a free-for-all, but from the start, we always put out there at least 2 weeks in advance a list of questions that we would ask that would structure the discussion. And so people could read them beforehand and think about what they wanted to say and not have to totally react in the moment. So it's a mixture of live debate, because we could respond in real time to what people just said, but you could also kind of plan out your responses to the main questions, and it gave structure to these discussions. So we ended up going for a while, having like 1 or 2 a month of those, and we would pick topics that we thought were interesting, that were emerging from our everyday conversations in #CryptTheVote. And basically, and then the other thing that we added, 2 other things. One was to do an online survey to find out what issues and initiatives people were most interested in, and share the data from that in order to spur further discussion. And then the other thing was, when we added our blog, which is basically a website, we post things. We started to do interviews with candidates, mostly local candidates, but eventually we did do some presidential candidates. Pete Buttigieg and Senator Warren did discussions with us. And so that's really the scope of what Crypt the Vote does, all using the hashtag Crypt the Vote to tie it together. As far as, our purpose was always a little bit fuzzy, but I think we wanted mainly to create a space for ongoing discussion of disability issues in Twitter. And so we never, I think, tried to imply that we were reaching everybody. So Twitter's kind of self-selective. We didn't think that we could move the earth or do anything like really super revolutionary. We hoped to draw in journalists because Twitter is a standard forum for journalism, and politicians staffs, and hope that, again, by using Twitter, that we would draw attention because we could include people in our tweets that we hoped would read our stuff. And it's hard to say whether we were successful, but I think we were probably one part of success, that in the last campaign, the 2020 campaign, there was a lot more disability engagement than ever before. A lot more presidential candidates put out detailed disability policies, which was always one of our underlying goals, to get them to do that. And certainly from zero activity or at least identifiable discussion, we definitely know that lots of people with disabilities found a new voice and have found a new way to get involved and to begin to dig into politics from a disability perspective. We also made real efforts to be intersectional from the start. I'm not personally the best spokesperson for that, but I think some of the things that we did are pretty basic. When we were doing topical choices, we tried to make several of our topics about how disability issues in communities intersect with other issues in communities. We made sure that people that we had as co-hosts of our discussions represented marginalized communities as much as we could. And I think another thing to do, which we did to some extent, but probably could do more, is to identify systematically other communities and hashtags on Twitter and other social media, and in an appropriate way, reach out to them and just interact with them as well. Not trying to impose on them or, obviously take over their discussions or, go too far in trying to imply that, well, your issues are our issues or whatever, but just to be aware of them and to be open to those interactions and maybe cross participation, which I think is something that any disability campaign can probably do to some extent. So yeah, I don't know if that helps or at least kicks off the discussion. One thing I would say, and I always forget to say this, is, how do you get people interested? Well, to be perfectly frank, I think that the main thing that got people interested in the beginning was the hashtag itself, Crypt the Vote, because it's kind of strange. It's kind of provocative. Some people don't like it because they don't like using a derivation of the word cripple in a disability rights type of environment. First of all, they don't even know that it is disability rights because they just think it sounds offensive. And we would almost always, certainly when our most popular discussions were happening, we would get passersby, if you will, who would make jokes about Crypt the Vote, having to do with the other uses of the word crypt. And that was inevitable, but it never really disrupted anything. And I think you need something that is not only descriptive, but has a little bit of a punch to it. And you can't be afraid to be a little humorous. But the flip side of that is, and I very much believe this is important with hashtags, you have to explain what it means, because people aren't necessarily going to automatically get it. And if you go along too long with a catchy hashtag that has sort of a hidden meaning, but you don't ever tell people what it is explicitly, that will build this sense of, oh, you're an in-group that I'm not a part of. Since I don't understand it, I feel excluded. So one thing we try to do is, particularly when there was a lot of activity going on, we had a standard tweet that we would put out with links in it that explains what CryptoVote is, why we use CryptoVote for a hashtag, what our purposes are, and who's invited, and all sorts of basic frequently asked questions. And we would just paste that out there, like at random times during peak times, so that anybody who came by, and we would do it individually too. If people put out a tweet that said, what the hell is CryptoVote, or why blah, 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 we would post this thing to say, well, here's what it is. And I think that helps a lot too. So as far as other movements using Twitter, I would recommend that too. There are a lot of hashtags out there that I see, which I think I know what they mean, but I'm not sure. And nobody explains what they are. And it creates that feeling of, this isn't for me, I guess, because I don't get the joke. And it's really, that's really unnecessary. And it's so easy to explain. So I'll leave it at that and see if people have any questions.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was really wonderful. And I appreciate that you were talking about focusing on Twitter. It reminds me, I think I had forgotten that one of the first things I learned about social media organizing was don't feel like you have to be on every platform, but pick what you can do and do it well, right? That depth is more important than breadth when it comes to really connecting with people. And that stood out that you said you and Alice and Greg became friends on Twitter early on, right? So I think that'll, in a minute, we'll come back to some of those concepts of community, right? How does that actually happen?
I could just add could I just add something real quick?
Uh-huh.
So we've been doing this since early 2016, the three of us, and the three of us have still never met in person.
That's pretty great.
So, yeah.
When you call yourself kindred spirits, I love it. Thank you. I also appreciate some of the things you talked about reminded me of accessibility. And so we'll come back to that as well. We have two surprise speakers who are going to speak just for a couple minutes each. So first, I am delighted to introduce Bisma Farzanzadeh. Let me spotlight Bisma. Bisma joined Senior and Disability Action, the organization where I work, just a couple months ago as our first ever digital organizer, and has been doing some incredible work. And so I invited Bisma to share a couple things. So go ahead.
Yay, thank you so much, Jessica. Yes, I'm really happy to have joined this organizing space in Senior and Disability Action. And so my main goal has been to figure out how to map our in-person organizing, which is so robust and beautiful and built around community, and making sure that we are transferring that to an online presence. And so one of the first projects here at Senior and Disability Action was to figure out how to stand by our rental subsidy demands that our members were working so hard to uphold. And so part of it was political education of seeing conversations with the Board of Supervisors being a means of storytelling and holding those workshops, but then also using platforms that members had been engaging on, such as Zoom, to then record those videos or meet with them in person and record the sentiments that they were sharing on the importance of rental subsidies. And so at the end, we were able to submit 13 videos in total, 3 of which were in Spanish and 10 in English, of our members speaking on the importance of rental subsidies that was so effective at building community across Zoom, online, and kind of mapping what we have been doing in person. And so really excited about all of these projects. And the most recent one that I have taken on along with our members is actually holding a social media advocacy course, where we're actually increasing our members' comfort online, especially older folks who may not be as in tune with how Twitter or hashtags work, or may have just enough information to get on a Zoom meeting. And so part of it is also a conversation on accessibility. For instance, in yesterday's class, we also talked about how to create alt text so that when folks are posting online, making sure that it's accessible to a screen reader. And so I'll also drop the link in the class for the class because the course is still going on, and we would love to have it shared with as many people who want to increase their digital and social media skills. It is every Monday and Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m. PST, and would encourage anyone who is willing to open the conversation on how to increase our comfort online and find community to also join that course.
Thank you so much, Bisma. And if you, this isn't just a personal plug, but because Bisma is putting out so much great stuff, I would definitely follow Senior and Disability Action on Facebook, Twitter, now Instagram, and you'll be able to see, I think the budget videos are going to be posted in the next week or two. And like Bisma said, the social media course is already there. So our next surprise speaker is Blythe Kim. Oh, Blythe, I can't spotlight you if you can't do video, but that's fine.
This is Blythe. I just turned my video on.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. There's Blythe. So Blythe is communications manager. I apologize. At Detroit Disability Power, which we have been honored to work a lot with DDP in the past, and have had several of their other organizers here. They're doing amazing work. And so Blythe is going to share a little bit about what she's doing in terms of digital organizing.
This is Blythe. Thank you, Jessica. I am entering my 4th week as communications director at DDP. And before that, I was at another org here in Detroit doing some organizing, as one does in the pandemic, virtually. It was, I will say, even that I started I was a month into the org before we were all working at home. And so organizing a community without having known the community, is a challenge. And just holding on to the idea that organizing is relationships, and that developing those relationships in a virtual space can be challenging. And really finding value in finding the people that were in the same spaces as I was, of trying to be involved, but also finding it to be new, and building off of that energy of wanting to be participatory, and developing them to be community organizers on their own. Especially in this digital context, it seems like it's really easy to push a button or share and get people to virtue signal on social media, but there's some real action that we need people to be doing, and finding that it's really much more impactful when it comes from a peer that's been developed to be a community organizer versus myself as a staff member telling people to do something. Finding that on Zoom, when instead of speaking on my own, asking a person in the community to speak on your behalf or the mission's behalf is really effective, as well as everything is about education and prep work, and making sure that those people are prepared going into those spaces to do the work, and really relying on that community organizing is about community.
Thank you so much, Blythe. That was really great to hear. So I'm going to bring up all our speakers. Give me 1 second to do this. Okay, got everybody. So thank you again for everyone being here. And I'm going to start with a few questions, and then we'll have some time for other questions from the chat. I also want to call out what we have started doing that we're going to do this time is to use our call next month. So it's always the third Tuesday of the month, the same time. So we'll use our September time to continue this conversation. We may not have our speakers with us because they're all very busy and may not have time, but we will have more time to do small groups and really think about what we're doing in our own organizations and our own communities. And I'm thinking we can use the organizers forum itself as a little practice, right? How do we reach out more to people on Facebook? We're not even on Twitter, and we should be, right? So we can let people know about these calls and bring more people into this space. So mark your calendar for that. So I want to go back to some of these questions about community. I think Irene was first talking about how important it is to create community. Andrew gave some examples of getting to know people. Bisma and Blythe both referred to that. So I want to start with Irene and then invite any of our other folks to jump in on how do you actually help people feel like they're part of something and feel connected to people without being face-to-face.
Yeah, it's a big question. I mentioned Facebook groups. That's kind of where my mind first goes to when thinking about this. But I think another way of kind of opening the door to building community is making people feel like, you know, their realities are being witnessed, and like they can have an emotional connection to the work, you know, that it's not just transactional, like I was mentioning, like it's not just like, hey, we need you to sign this. Obviously, like many of the issues that we all are working on are very emotional, but I think sometimes it doesn't. The connection and kind of person to person connection that's inherent in those issues isn't necessarily spotlighted. So one thing we've done, I also work for our 501c4 sister organization, Bay Rising Action, and we did some ads in support of a candidate running for the San Francisco District Attorney office in 2019. And the progressive district attorney candidate, and one of the big issues that had come up in San Francisco was, you know, accountability and around for the police department and what policing looks like in San Francisco. There had been some high profile killings of community members by police, and our local partner organization had personal relationships with some of the parents of some of those people, and they were very motivated to record videos for us for the campaign, you know, talking about how important it was for us to elect this candidate. And yeah, they were very emotional videos, and like, you know, we had, they were, you know, directed and conceived in partnership with those family members. And I think judging by the comments and the engagement on those ads, it really helped Latino and Black voters in San Francisco like make the connection and link the fight to racial justice as well, and kind of open the door to building community around this campaign.
Thanks, Irene. Any other speakers want to add to how do we build community online?
Well, yeah, I've been thinking about that, and I'll say we've certainly Crypto Vote has certainly built a kind of community online. In fact, uh, definitely that's the only way we can, because it is a national campaign, international too. Other countries get involved when they have elections here and there, especially right now, Canada, oddly enough. So, but I don't think that we ever really were conscious of it as a goal or an effort. I think we were the ones who were taken by surprise at the development of a community. Three of us tended, myself, Alice, and Greg, I think at the time tended to be more had a more business. We had stuff we wanted to do and stuff we wanted to talk about, and what ended up happening was people formed sort of a community. So I think sometimes it can happen, you can back yourself into a community rather than just create one consciously. I think if we did it now, started now, we probably would do it more consciously. And maybe it's something we can do going forward, is try to more consciously create that. But it emerged because people were talking every day. And so maybe creating the space where that is possible, just to encourage that sort of everyday ongoing conversation is a help, that doesn't have to be highly programmed, that doesn't have to be highly monitored. There was a question I saw in the chat about monitoring it, and I just say, I think this is part of it too. Somebody asked whether we spend a lot of hours monitoring all the tweets from Crypto Vote, and I'm going to say yes and no. Technically, what I do, and I think Greg and Alice do the same. In Twitter, you can type in a hashtag into a search bar and get only the tweets, view only the tweets with that hashtag. So it's relatively easy to, monitor them without having to read through a ton of this extraneous stuff. I check it every day, at least once. It's on my to-do list every day to go and look at stuff, retweet things, respond to things. So every day, regardless, I will do that a little bit. So it has to be ongoing, but it doesn't have to be hours and hours. And as far as monitoring, we always try to have a light touch and not be like real particular about, well, this isn't the appropriate way to respond to that, or, yelling at people for having the wrong etiquette, or like if they wanted to make a comment about their health and use the hashtag, we weren't going to say, well, thank you, but that's not really political, so don't use the hat. It is possible to do it in a very persnickety way where you're like micromanaging it, and that I think would discourage community. And the fact that we, number one, didn't want to do that because it takes a lot of work, I think helped too. So having a kind of a light touch on the monitoring, let people spread, talk about their lives, their dogs, their cats, if that's what they want to do on a day. And don't be too particular about the community developing, obviously with some kind of reasonable standards. Don't tolerate, on the flip side, don't tolerate insults, of any kind, racial, ethnic, or just general, like being mean to people. And that includes
Andrew, I'm going to stop
sorry.
you there if that's okay, because we only have about 5 minutes.
Apologize.
Thank you so much for all of that. No, we could talk for hours. It's great. Bisman, Blythe, do you have any comments on community before we go on?
This is Blythe. Yeah, just to go off what people have been saying, I think a lot of the struggle of getting people to do what you need them to do has been a lot of the best way is hand holding. So for instance, on Zoom, a practice that I've really gotten into is screen sharing, filling out the commitment card at the end to show this is the time to do it together, and that is really effective. But there are other actions that require not so subtle hand holding, and knowing that takes a lot of personal energy, and just being able to identify that if you have your allies within your community that you can like count on to be like the rest of the tendrils within your community. Those are like really the people to engage. Yeah.
Thank you. I love that. Okay, so I'm going to turn to the chat. And apologies, there has been a lot going on in the chat. So the big thing is that I will send everything out and we will bring it back into next month's conversation. So if you are interested in following up, there's a link in the chat. If that is not accessible to you, then stay on after 11 or just put your email in the chat. So I'll make sure that you're included. But I'm going to go back to Irene to comment on what the kind of the conversation about tools on community organizing on TikTok.
Yeah, definitely. So Edison was asking about this. There are a lot of tools for community organizing, and they're constantly evolving. Action Network is one that Bay Rising uses, and it's pretty low cost. In fact, there's an option that's free, and it's basically it's kind of a database, but it allows you also to mass email. They have an option where you can add on to be able to text people, and it lets you set up petitions and events so that you can capture participants' contact info. So that's one that I would definitely check out. But beyond that, there are lots of different tools. It just depends how you're thinking of contacting people. And in terms of TikTok, I don't really know who is good at this, but I'm sure that there are organizations. I personally am not on TikTok. So I would start by, asking people who are really on TikTok a lot and like seeing what they're observing and what they think would work. But I would check out Sunrise Movement. Wouldn't be surprised if they're doing some TikTok experiments, and Youth versus Apocalypse and Power California. There aren't ads on TikTok, I don't think, but you could kind of get around that by planning TikTok challenges, like inviting people to make videos on a particular topic, and or inviting influencers to make videos, and that could look like giving them honorariums.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to wrap us up. I'm identifying a lot of things for our next call, which will be on Tuesday, September 21st. We can talk about accessibility and how we can really create spaces that work for people with all different kinds of disabilities. We can maybe talk about TikTok if folks want to. If anyone is an expert on TikTok or has any experience, please put that in the chat or let me know. We should talk more about community. I know there's a question about Twitter storms, so we'll talk about that. And then thank you, Irene, for these ideas of other groups to check out who are doing great digital organizing. And Tara put and barriers to accessing technology. Absolutely. We are combining our work at Senior and Disability Action with a campaign for pushing AT&T to do free Wi-Fi in supportive housing buildings where there's a lot of disabled people and seniors. So yeah, we'll bring that in as well. So we have a lot to do next month. I want to give a huge thank you to our speakers, Irene Rojas Carroll, Andrew Pulrang, and our surprise speakers, Bisma Farzan Sayed and Blythe Kim. We are really grateful to have all of you, and our interpreters and our captioner and all of our participants. And I'm going to invite our speakers. We only have a minute or two remaining, but if you all have one parting thought, one thing that that you wish you knew early on that you think is, kind of a general rule. And I'm going to start with Bisma if you want.
I think one thing I would have liked to have told myself is that this is a healing and learning journey for all of us collectively. And so kind of just reminding us that there's no experts when it comes to social media or digital advocacy, but rather we're all in this learning journey together, and to be patient with yourself as well as the people around you.
Thank you. Blythe.
This might took mine. Yeah, it's just like, I think it's always a learning journey. We're all learning together, and being okay with the mistakes that are made, and that like we can take responsibility and own up to them and make things better the next time.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think to have reasonably limited goals, especially for the medium you're choosing, so that you don't expect something to come out of a particular platform that platform's not really suited to do. Yeah.
Great advice. Thank you. And Irene?
I would say experiment, experiment, experiment. Figure out what works for your organization and your accounts. It doesn't have to be big and fancy. It can be small and grassroots to start out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask for a show of hands. If you are able to join on September 21st, raise your physical hand or your Zoom hand. Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of hands. This is good. And in the spirit of experimenting and remembering that it's a journey, like the speakers just talked about, think about one thing that you want to try doing in the next month, or something that you want to come to the call and kind of figure out how you're going to try it on the next call or beyond the next call. Sound good, everybody? I see some thumbs up. Thank you. And we'll see you online. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.